In a world where it seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos post-game reaction podcast brought to you by Funny Bone Broth. My name is Ben Grant, joined as always by JB as the Toronto Argonauts lose a 23-13 decision to the Ottawa Red Blacks. And JB and I are going to talk to you over the next little while about all the things that happened in the game, the good, the bad, where things blew up in the Argos faces, break it down a little bit. But at the end of the day, these are the two biggest takeaways we have from this. Defensively, you can't miss tackles that would otherwise have gotten you off the field. And offensively, if the other team is going to stack the box to take away the run, then you need to be able to burn them in man coverage. And the Argos fell victim to that on defense and couldn't capitalize on the box stacking that Ottawa did offensively. And those are the reasons that the Argos lost the football game. JB, this wasn't out of nowhere. We could kind of see this coming, but we both predicted a win. What went wrong other than what I've already stated?
Yeah, I was worried that it was a letdown game coming out of Saskatchewan, and they played like a letdown game. I thought they would be more energetic. They came out flat. Ottawa came out as we expected, desperately fighting to save their season, and Toronto did not match them in intensity. But like any football game, you can point to three plays, and those three plays decided the game. I think the touchdown at the end of the half was just an absolute killer. If they don't score that touchdown, I think it's a totally different game. And then, later in the game, the shoe penalty and then the Ottawa touchdown was just an absolute killer. So I think those two plays probably cheated Toronto out of a probably undeserved win, but kind of a grind out home win. So, Ottawa did not come in and blow the doors off them. I thought Toronto played flat, and there were like three moments that tilted the game.
Watching the game, it was pretty clear to me that Toronto is the more talented team, even as banged up as they are, missing DeVaris Daniels, their number one receiver, Eric Rogers, their number two, their best offensive lineman, their left tackle. Like they're so short guys, but they still look like they had a bit of a talent mismatch. But they, like you said, it was an energy thing, and they didn't have that today. They just weren't on, and it looked like that from the beginning. That yes, they had the Banks touchdown, but it didn't look like a team that was fired up to play, not to the same level that Ottawa came out, and that held to be true.
Yeah, I mean, just to jump in, I think the reality is they don't think about Ottawa. There isn't really any rivalry between these two franchises, and there wasn't last year, and they just didn't have the hate in their heart that they did for Saskatchewan, and sometimes it's hard to achieve that level of intensity when you don't have it. Depending on the football team you are, they're not quite a team that can just take care of business, sort of an on switch. They're definitely a team that needs to get fired up, and I think Ottawa just was a bit of a boring opponent.
Let's go through the game and break it down as we go. So, first of all, I actually love the 5 o'clock start for some things. I know it doesn't work well. We'll see what the ratings are like. Toronto has drawn fairly good TV numbers, but they've been helped out by playing Saskatchewan twice, Winnipeg once. We'll see how this game rates. But the great thing about the 5 o'clock start, there was amazing tailgating going on before the game. And I got there early enough to be able to just do a bit of socializing and walk through and sample some cuisine. It was amazing. It was such a nice environment. And 5 o'clock is the perfect time of day because this is all going on sort of at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. And everyone's got a chance to eat and have a few drinks. It doesn't feel weird because it's not like 9 a.m. or anything like that. So that was a really nice environment. It was a beautiful day for a game. If only the game could have lived up to what was happening pregame, because it was just really cool to have this sort of time of day for, especially on a weekend and a day that most people don't have to get up for work tomorrow, being a holiday. So That part of it was great. I'm all for the Sunday 5 o'clock starts when there is a Monday holiday the following day.
Yeah, I'd be happy with, if you ran from the beginning of the year until, the end of August, if you ran Sunday every week at 5 o'clock.
Well, Sunday games need to be a part of the CFL schedule.
Yeah, well, at least during the summer. And then I think when the NFL comes on, I think you start to transition out of that. But we've railed against this. Let's have some consistency. Like at least have two different times, not like every week. The Argos are Saturday. Anyways, it's a real problem. They need to pick a date and they need to pick a time and try and build some consistency out of that. And I think 5 o'clock on Sunday all summer is a great idea.
There was a Chinook helicopter flyover, which I am a big fan of. I like flyovers anyway. You're not a flyover guy, right?
No, I like flyovers.
Do you? Okay. It didn't seem like your kind of thing. It's, exciting and stuff. But the Chinook flyover is my favorite of all of them. I know it's not like fast moving, like when they, throw a CF-18 over top or something, but they're such cool vehicles. I thought that was amazing.
I could give you my air show rant, but I'll save that one for later in August.
Let's get into the game here. So it was an interesting start because Ottawa seemed to throw a style of defense at the Argos that they weren't expecting. Now, I did ask McLeod after the game if he was caught off guard by that. He says no, he expected they planned for what they saw. They just weren't able to capitalize, especially early. But that first drive, Ottawa had 11 of their 12 players lined up within 7 yards of the line of scrimmage. And you could see just from the opening snap, they're hell-bent on stopping the run. They are not going to let Andrew Harris run today. And if the Argos are going to beat them, it's going to have to be with someone else. That was clearly from the first play, the first drive of the game, what Ottawa's mission statement was. And that means a lot of man coverage. It means a lot of they ran a bunch of cover 0, they ran a bunch of cover 1. They would play zones and back off a little bit in second and long, and there was 1 second and 15, I think, which Argos actually converted where there was no pressure at all. But those opportunities were very rare. It was get everybody on the line of scrimmage, in everyone's face, and you kind of talked about this in our pregame walkthrough episode about how if you were Ottawa, you would send a lot of heat and stop the run, and that's what they did.
Yeah, it seemed pretty clear that, Toronto wanted the run on first down. So you run blitz on one and then you back off and play, deeper pass coverage on second down. It's a pretty straightforward response to what Toronto has been doing. And I think largely Toronto did deal with it okay. I mean, if you look at the total yards in the air, the issue is, again, the red zone and getting the ball into the end zone. That kind of reared its ugly head. I thought they did pass the ball when they couldn't run decently. If those guys catch the ball in the fourth quarter, again, there's 3 or 4 plays that changed this game, even though it looks like they were beaten. 4 plays changed this game to a Toronto win.
If you are unable to run, then you've got to hit big plays. You just can't, when the opponent knows that you can't run the ball at all, and Toronto with 33 rushing yards all game, Harris really couldn't get going at all, then you've got to have those big plays. You've got to take advantage, like I said, off the top. You've got to have those deep touchdowns. More of the plays that we saw to Speedy B, that's got to happen several times a game, and they miss their opportunities throughout because you can't consistently. It's so hard to be able to just move the ball down the field 10, 15 yards at a time. In 3-down football, you just don't have that. You don't have that kind of luxury, and especially if you get a penalty here and there, which they also did, then there's no hope for you. So at the end of the day, McLeod Bethel-Thompson had a pretty good statistical day. He threw for 340 yards, no interceptions, and yet that's not enough because when you have no run game supporting it, those 340 yards divided up over the course of the game, there's just too many breaks in there, too many 2 straight incompletions in there where you're just going to have punts on almost every drive. And that's what they had aside from the couple of field goals.
Yeah, they missed Daniels too, obviously, tonight. That he is, a downfield weapon. I agree with you, though. More deep shots were needed, the way they did against Saskatchewan. But with the offensive line, there was not on many downs a ton of time for long developing pass routes.
And something Coach Dinwiddie addressed after the game, but didn't want to use as an excuse, and McLeod Bethel Thompson wouldn't even hear of it as an excuse. But AJ Richardson was supposed to be dressed today. He was going to be the starter this week as the number 2 to the boundary. And he ended up getting banged up the last practice of the week, right at the end, doing some red zone drills. And instead, they had to move Phillips to that spot and then bring Tommy Neild in. And so you've now got Phillips playing a spot that he's not really familiar with. I actually like him there. I think he belongs in that spot, although not now with Rogers potentially coming back. But it just meant all these moving pieces and all the plays you practice all week long. Suddenly there are different guys running them. And Tommy Neild hasn't been out there really at all this year. Brissett was a game time decision. He ended up not playing. And so, yeah, they were sort of all over the place. But the Argos didn't want to put excuses out there. I will put them out there, though. That's really tough when you've got guys lining up in different spots and there's going to be chemistry issues. Forget about not having Daniels on the field. Like, that's a huge deal in itself. But the guy that replaced Daniels wasn't even expecting to play that spot all week. So in that first quarter, the Argos defense, their first possession, they had a bust, which was really the only way Ottawa was able to get down the field consistently today. Caleb Evans had a great game, but seeing that bust early was a little bit sickening because we saw that early in the season, and then the last few games they've been able to sort of iron those problems out, those communication issues out. Ackland had a 45-yard pass reception where he ended up catching it in the flats, and there was no flats defender to be seen. Both McFadden and Amos dropped out. I don't know whose responsibility that was. I couldn't tell watching it live, but they both dropped into deep responsibility. Nobody was anywhere near Ackland when he caught the ball. He was able to make McFadden miss and ran for that long gain. And this would come up a few times today. This is the first time in a few weeks where we've seen multiple busts in the secondary. And I don't know the reason for that, but they had tightened it up previously, and now it's back to the drawing board.
Yeah, the secondary had their worst game since BC. They just did not have the same fly-to feel that they had the last couple of games. They weren't. Yeah, they just didn't seem to have the play calling just didn't have a sense of what Ottawa was doing. It just felt like we were not in the right defense, and Ottawa kind of picked us apart, and Ottawa was still able to move the ball down the field in big chunks, which is what they like to do. And we were not able to take away the big chunk play, which is what Caleb Evans lives on. You have to force him to nickel and dime you, and they just did not get that done today.
The Argos really didn't get any breaks today either. Even going back to, there was a play in the first quarter, McLeod Bethel Thompson seemed to complete a pass. I think it was to Curly Gittins Jr. Ottawa challenged it, and it ended up getting overturned. There were two things that went wrong there for the Argos. So first of all, it went from being what would have been like a first in goal or close to a first and goal situation. Instead, they ended up having to kick that first field goal. But on top of that, the play that they had sent in before LaPolice threw out the challenge flag was going to be an end around to Curly Gittins Jr. And remember, we talked about how centered the Ottawa defense was on Andrew Harris. That end around to Gittins Jr. was gone. It was blown dead basically right as the ball was snapped, and Gittins Jr. was getting the ball in motion. And there was nobody. There was nobody left. He would have run that ball into the end zone for a touchdown. but the play was correct. It should have been overturned. It wasn't a catch. It just seemed like really bad luck on the Argos part of all the times. And they did go back to that Gittins end around. It ran for 9 yards the second time, but it was gone that first time. That was a touchdown. So just one of those games where you're not getting the breaks, and that's not what this game is about. Toronto didn't play well enough to win, but a break or two could have been the difference in this one.
Well, it reminds me of toward the end of the game, and the TV broadcast didn't go back to it, but I thought there was an amazingly quick whistle on that Ottawa kick return at the end of the game, where it looked like the Argos came down and stripped the ball. And I didn't really understand why the whistle was blown, like forward progress was blown so quickly. So I thought that they got a little bit hosed on that play.
Yeah, that was a rough one too. But again, it's about breaks. Like some games that's not called. Go back to the Dane Evans fumble that cost them a win against Calgary. That was a quarterback sneak that seemed to last like 8 seconds before there was a whistle, and the ball was stripped. And today it's like as soon as he got partially wrapped up, it's like, oh, whistle, he's surrounded. Again, it's not about that. It's not any one play, but not getting breaks when you're not playing well, it's going to lead to a loss. So it's 6-3 for Ottawa at the end of the first. All field goal game, not quite the exciting game that we saw last night from Winnipeg and Calgary, where it seemed like every single drive was a touchdown. This one finished the way it started with field goals and teams having trouble moving the ball. The second quarter was a little bit better though. So with Ottawa selling out to stop the run, McLeod Bethel-Thompson was able to finally take advantage of it. He ended up finding Banks on it was sort of a hitch and go fade that they ran from, I think it was 29 yards out. But the hitch part didn't sell. Like the DB actually didn't bite on the hitch part. It was just that Banks had such nice separation. He gets back up to speed so quickly. McLeod threw a perfect ball, and in a place where only Banks could catch it, he ends up catching a touchdown. Argos are up 10-6 at that point, and it seemed like that might be enough to get them going, but it wasn't. That was almost the end of things at that point.
Yeah, the kick return right after that, I think, speaks to how the Argos just did not have their A game. The kick return unit has been very good for the Argos, but then they allowed a huge return on that, maybe not huge, but a pretty sizable return on the kickoff after that touchdown. And that kind of stuff is just deadly. You're trying to put an opponent in the grave, and to just give them more hope. It was just that kind of night for Toronto. They just did not execute at a high enough level to take care of business.
And would you have gone away from the running game? Because it's not like they sat on the running game in the second half, but in the first half there was nothing at all. Clearly the game plan is to take away Harris. Do you call that a little bit differently? Because I was thinking, like, I don't know if I would have, seeing how stacked the box was, for me, I go away from it. I do misdirection. I play fake. I play action to Harris, but I probably don't run enough. And yet he still had a couple of runs that, whether it was one that went for 6, one that went for 8, but then there were minuses in there as well. I feel like Andrew Harris kind of makes you play call very differently than you might otherwise, because he can take over a game on the ground. You don't see typically teams in the CFL with a running back who has 25 or more carries, and yet we've seen that multiple times this year. And you see a play like that where they completely stack the box. He still runs it for 8 yards anyway. It's really hard to give up on calling run plays, even though that's probably not the right thing to do.
No, you should give up on it when it's that drastic. I agree. You don't want to give up on the run too early, but they were not getting any push at all. I mean, he ran for 17 yards for the game. I think when it's so drastically being stopped, you do have to just simply stop wasting downs. You were just wasting downs. You might as well take a knee.
It did seem like there were a lot of 2nd and 9, 2nd and 10s in this game.
You're just wasting it down. I get it. Harris is a big part, and he would probably go bananas at being put to the side. But I think from a coaching point of view, that was not a let's keep sticking with this, it'll happen. It was like, no, this is not going to happen. They've spent an entire half shoving it down our throat. We do not have our starting O-line. We just have to give Harris the rest of the night off, other than the occasional pass, because it's just not there. And to be honest, that's not the end of the world in terms of keeping that guy healthy.
I was kind of disappointed that they went away from some of the things that were working in the second quarter. Like they sort of found some success in those quick passes to Gittins, those quick receiver screens out wide, because the DBs had started backing off just a little bit since there wasn't really help over top. They're playing man. They're playing, man to the field side, especially knowing they've got no help at all. And so they were giving a bit of ground, and the Argos found success there, but they didn't really go back to those plays in the second half, and I thought that was kind of weird. They also went empty a couple times in the second quarter, and it worked. Like having Harris out there as a sixth receiver, which we had talked about in the lead up to this game, because I thought that might be a nice strategy to go six wide. My theory was to help out the offensive line. That wasn't what they seem to be using it for today, but it's just another way to get Harris the ball. So put Harris out as receiver, throw him some quick screens, and we didn't really get that, and they didn't go back to empty in the second half. So I thought that might have been a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I still think the game boils down to really three things: is that you can't give up that touchdown at the end of the first half. You can't take that penalty for throwing a shoe. And those receivers have to catch the ball in the fourth quarter.
Let's talk about that drive at the end of the first half. So Beatty kicks a field goal to make it 13-6. The Argos feel like they're in control, even though they're not playing well. It just didn't feel like Ottawa was going to be able to move the ball enough against Toronto's defense at that stage. And Ottawa used what turned out to be a really good timeout. I was actually thinking as Ottawa called it, there were like 40-something seconds left in the half. And it was as Beatty was lining up for his field goal that would make it 13-6. Ottawa called a timeout to not let the Argos drain any more time. And I was thinking, hey, you're going to want to hang on to your timeouts. I don't know if I would have used one there, because they just hadn't been able to get anything going. It didn't seem like Ottawa was going to be able to put a drive together with like 40 seconds to go. But it turned out to be a beautiful timeout call for La Police, because they turned it not just into points, but into a touchdown. And that play, I don't know if it was a bust or if it was just defenders having to make a decision, because Caleb Evans escaped the pocket, bought himself some time, and Jalen Acklin was able to work himself free, ended up being wide open in the end zone for a deep play. And that was just such a crushing way to end the half, especially knowing that Ottawa was getting the ball to start the third quarter.
Yeah, it was really what was wrong with the team tonight. They had a fantastic drive. They were moving the ball down the field, 8 yards, 10 yards, 8 yards, 10 yards. And then they got stalled, and what should have been a touchdown drive turned into a field goal drive. So right there, if you're trying to bury a team, you have to score a touchdown on that drive. And then with that much time left, let Ottawa get the field goal. Like what are you worried about? To me, you have to have the end zone filled with defenders. You have to have cover 3, cover 4, deep guys, because that's what they want to do. That's what Evans wants to do. He wants to throw the ball 40 yards. I just don't leave yourself open to a bust there. Whether the cornerback thought he was coming up to support if Evans was running or what he was thinking, but he let the leading receiver for Ottawa go stand in the end zone by himself. So I think you have to call a defense that does not allow for a bust with 50 seconds left in the half. I mean, I didn't understand. I didn't understand what they were protecting. Like, let them throw it underneath and kick a field goal. Like, you just can't give them a touchdown there. You absolutely gave them life instead of finishing the game. It changed the game.
And the Argos couldn't do anything offensively in the second half. Ottawa came out to start the third quarter with another great drive. The Argos this was the only time in the game where the Argos got a little bit lucky. That could have been a touchdown, that first drive of the third quarter. Evans, drove the team down really nicely, but there was a play on first down where Evans had a receiver wide open in the middle of the field that he could have walked into the end zone. He didn't see it. He ended up throwing to the back corner, overthrowing his receiver. They ended up kicking a field goal a couple plays later, but it was still a really nice drive from Caleb Evans, a nice drive from Ottawa, but it was 16-13 instead of 20-13, which it really should have been. And then the way Toronto responded to that drive, McLeod hits Gittins for a really nice gain to start the third quarter. They hadn't been on the field forever because Ottawa had back-to-back drives on either side of halftime, but then Andrew Harris had a rare fumble. And at this point, he now had 15 yards on 8 carries, the fumble as well. That had to have been when Coach Dinwiddie decided, well, that's it, because he only had one more carry called for Andrew Harris the rest of the game. They could not run the football.
Yeah, that fumble was also a killer. They had just converted that first down. That was just that was really one of those moments that just killed any momentum the offense was able to put together.
One of the bright spots in this game wasn't really related to the game itself, but there was an achievement award here for McLeod Bethel-Thompson. And again, it's unfortunate the Argos couldn't have come out on top because it would have been nice to talk more about this post-game with him. He wasn't really in the mood for talking about personal milestones, and I get that. But he threw for over 10,000 yards today and moved into 5th all-time in Argos history for passing yards, which is pretty incredible to think. Like, people don't think about him having been in Toronto that long because of the lost season. His first pass thrown was in 2018, I think, for the Argos. And he's now behind only legends, Hall of Famers. He's behind Doug Flutie, Damon Allen, Conridge Holloway, and Ricky Ray. And then McLeod Bethel-Thompson. I think people are pretty shocked by that. This team that's been around for 148 years, and McLeod Bethel-Thompson has passed for the 5th most yards of every quarterback the Argos have had. So that milestone came I think that came in the third quarter. He passed the 10,000 yard mark, I think, in the second quarter, and I think he moved into 5th all time in the third quarter. And there's a nice little thing on the display board. The fans are really happy, but it for him personally, but it just didn't feel like that was enough. It didn't feel like this was going to be enough for them. At that point, already fans were getting nervous, even though it was just 16-13 to end the quarter. Toronto was just missing on so many different things. They just missed on sacks. They just missed on tackles on second and long. They just missed interceptions that were, inches away. And they just missed completions offensively. There were a few balls that could have been huge plays, and they were just, a foot too far. And it was a game where nothing was going right. And heading to the fourth quarter, they're down 16-13. And it kind of felt like this wasn't going to end well.
No, I mean, from Ja'Garrett Davis wiping out an Argo tackler on a play, it just was a cursed evening.
Yeah, and that continued into the fourth quarter. They could not put a drive together. They continued to miss tackles, and then finally, in this sort of crucial moment where it looked like the Argos were going to get off the field, with I think there was about 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter at that point. Second down play is unsuccessful for Ottawa, and then we have the objectionable conduct penalty from McManus to give Ottawa a first down and goal. And then just after that, Evans finds Bahar for a touchdown. Edwards gets a penalty on that play, and then gets another penalty on the ensuing point after. And that led to kind of a weird series because they weren't back-to-back OCs, and so he didn't get thrown out of the game, but I think he thought he was thrown out of the game because after that penalty, he ran off the field. They called him off and replaced him with Priester, and he thought he was kicked out of the game, so he actually ran off the field, and the Argos had to send a staff member sprinting after him all the way around the field to the Argos locker room to bring him back because he hadn't been disqualified from the game. It was just such a weird sequence in a weird day for that defense, but really falling apart like that. I know it was late and, maybe the game was already decided by that point, but it just felt like maybe if they could have had a break there, maybe if that's a field goal, they're down 6 now, they can drive for a winning touchdown instead of being down 10 at that point. It's a pretty different ball game, even with the lack of offense that there was from the Argos.
Yeah, look, Whit McManus has gotten plenty of flowers from me, but you can't throw that guy's shoe. I mean, everybody knows that. I mean, that is just an absolutely killer penalty for a captain to be taking. In my mind, he cost them the game. The game was over when they scored that touchdown, and they scored that touchdown because McManus threw the shoe. They just can't have that.
For me, that's not the game, but obviously I agree with you. You can't have that. You can't have leaders on your defense taking penalties like this. Edwards as well. Like, I don't feel like you can lose your cool like that at that stage. But to me, the defense isn't the reason the Argos lost today. You can't expect to score 13 points as an offense and win the game. And so for me, it stops right there. No matter what the defense does, if the offense has 13 points, no points in the second half, I don't think you can really pin anything on the defense at that point. But yeah, it was such an upsetting turn of events, and then the way this game sort of ends with Toronto getting one last shot to maybe put something together. You're hoping for that huge punt return from Banks, and ends up being a 12-yard loss, and that was when people started to leave the stadium.
Yeah, I mean, I know he was trying to help. He isn't the player that he was. He's an older guy now, so that was probably, a bit optimistic to think that he could reverse field at his age. But I appreciate that he was trying to help. I don't really mind that. Mine is the drops. The drops killed them. Ambles had a big drop. KGJ had a big drop, and Banks reached out for a pass with one hand instead of two. All of those plays change the game if they're caught. If they're driving for a winning touchdown, not the first of two scores. That's where I feel the shoe, cost them the game. I think it's a different vibe in the stadium if they are driving for the winning touchdown instead of, a likely impossible double score.
Coach Dinwiddie was pretty animated after the game. He was upset with the team. It was pretty clear. And I wonder if this is a point where he's lost his patience enough that changes are going to be made personnel-wise. He didn't say they would, but he did allude to that, maybe being a possibility. Maybe these are discussions that need to happen. And this is not the first time we've heard him mention this. Do you think we start to see personnel changes based on this result?
Well, it's a very interesting dynamic. When you have a coach and a player or players, that as a head office has to be a moment where you have to decide who do you want more. Are we all in on this coach? And if he feels this player is a poison, then we're going to get that player out of town. Or is the coach wrong and the coach has to go because the player is really talented? I point to an Odell Beckham Jr. as an NFL example. I think that's a really tough decision for a front office to make as to who are you backing. If we trade somebody talented because he is oil and water with coach, that's a big question. So yeah, I'm curious to see. It'll certainly speak to their commitment to Dinwiddie. If they trade somebody out of town who has a lot of talent, I would just be really wary of that.
I think I would side with Dinwiddie on this. I think he's proven himself as a good head coach. I think he's the guy that you've invested time in, and you've seen him put together this program. Don't forget, 2019, this team could not buy a close game, let alone a win. And he came in as a rookie head coach, led them to the best record in the East, to the Eastern Final, And this year, again, like even as we talk now, this is like a first place Argos team. I know they've had struggles, but they came the closest that anyone has to beating Winnipeg all season. They had back-to-back wins against Saskatchewan. I know one of those has a bit of an asterisk next to it, but this is a good team that he has put together. And I think if you don't put trust in him at this point, then what are you doing? And so for me, I think the management has to listen to what he wants to do. I think they've already sort of decided that in my mind.
Yeah, look, if he wants Chris Edwards out of town, I think that is a very risky proposition. I'm not saying it's not going to work, but then you are all in, and you better hope that the ball lands on your roulette square, because that could go a variety of ways from a team perspective. So yeah, it's interesting. It isn't boring. He's clearly, and I don't know if it's Chris Edwards, but he's clearly angry at guys on the team, and Edwards has been not very controllable on the field. So I'm curious to see what happens this week, and whether they're able to kind of get back into winning mode. Tonight wasn't bad. It was just really boring. They, honestly, they look like the 2018 Argos.
They weren't very exciting at all. And just to further on what you said, I don't know who coach is talking about either, and I guess it could be anybody in theory. I get why it would be Edwards based on what you talked about, those back-to-back penalties and everything else, but I haven't ever heard coach say anything negative about Chris Edwards, and so I think that would be jumping to conclusions if we thought that it was him that was causing issues. And he's only been with the team now active for 3 games. So I don't know where the problems exactly are coming from, but he does seem to be frustrated with an attitude from somewhere, wherever it is on the team. And maybe we will see this week if moves are made. Then I think you have to assume, well, I guess that guy was causing some issues. And they may be in a position where they can make some moves, because this is their 6th game, and you've now got guys that are eligible to come back from the 6-game injured list. Some that we expect to return, some that we don't. I don't expect Peter Nicastro to come back. He's eligible to. I haven't got the sense that he's anywhere close to being able to return. I do, however, think we're going to see Eric Rogers and Johan Breskison come back. I think we're going to see Jack Cassar come back. There are going to be guys that are going to make a difference. But I don't know. I don't know what that's going to mean move-wise. It does put you in a position, though, where you can make some moves. Maybe you can make moves at receiver. If you've got Breskison, Rogers coming back, you've got Daniels, who is hopefully healthy and ready to go next week. Now you've got this huge surplus of receiver talent. So maybe a move is made. Now, offensive line-wise, this is what we were thinking coming into the game. I still think they need to make a move for a tackle. But Philip Blake actually played really well. I haven't graded the game. You can't really do that live. But I was trying to keep track of hurries, knockdowns, sacks, pressures that Philip Blake was allowing. And he had a really clean sheet. He did allow a couple of pressures. He allowed a knockdown and a hit. But I thought it was actually the best left tackle play the Argos have had all year, which is maybe saying something because he's not a tackle, but that's just in pass protection. I didn't really pay close attention to him as a run blocker, but in pass protection, Philip Blake looked really good, but I want to go back and look at the film and really see where some of those breakdowns were otherwise. But I still think they need to bring in a tackle unless they're positive that Isaiah Cage is coming back soon, and I just don't think you can be. So I think if you're going to make a move, you're looking to send somebody out of value potentially to bring back a tackle that can play and start.
I thought the kid, the Atlantic rookie, I thought he did okay out there. There were some moments where he got blown by, and there were some, wasn't perfect. But he wasn't a turnstile. I didn't feel like he was a hole in the boat. And for a rookie coming out of Canadian University ball, I think that bodes really well.
especially a guy that really didn't play guard in university too. I thought he had a very promising game. And again, I want to see the film on this, but I saw him quite a lot because he's standing right next to Philip Blake, who's the guy that I was watching the most. And yeah, like you said, there were some mistakes, and there were some times where he wasn't really able to sort of set the shelf, and he gave up a lot of ground in his pass protection. And he's going to have to anchor a little bit better going forward. But yeah, it wasn't like they were running right by him on every play. I didn't think he had as good a game as Blake did.
No.
But he's a rookie, and Blake is a veteran who's been around for a long time. Blake's your most decorated offensive lineman. So
they have to be happy. I think they have to be really happy with how he looked. I mean, if that's the starting point, offensive line is by far the hardest position to come in as a rookie. I think that has to be definitely a positive to take away from the game is that they found a nice one in that draft.
Yeah, for sure. And that's another area in which they are pretty rich, because you've got your quote unquote starting guards in Blake, who's now a tackle, and Bladek. But then you've also got McKellar, who can clearly play. We know that Lawrence, who's played really, actually, he had a good game at center today. We didn't have any missed snaps. And I do want to say, I should mention, he was one of the first players out on the field today, getting in extra snaps with Bethel Thompson. He was out there during a time where quarterbacks typically work on some timing with receivers. He was out there as the center for that, just getting in extra snaps. And we didn't see any snap issues from him today. But he's also a really good guard if Nicastro is going to come back and play center. And then you've got Churchill, Richards. This is suddenly a position where, do we see a move there? Does one of these guards get sent somewhere for tackle help? It's not going to be a 1-for-1 probably of equal value, but it is a surplus. Guard and receiver the Argos have in spades. JB, let's get to our plays of the game and our players of the game. So offensive play of the game is pretty thin. I've got one play that comes to mind, probably the same play as you. I'm thinking that Banks touchdown.
Yeah, I thought there were a couple of really nice throws that Macbeth made. I thought that seam throw in the second half was nice. There was one where he threw it over the linebacker, but in front of the safety. I thought he had a couple of gorgeous, like, professional throws tonight, but the fade touchdown was the play of the game for sure. Great call, great read, great execution. Should have been that all night.
Yeah, it was a beautiful throw. It was a perfect throw, and it was a gorgeous catch. And yeah, it was one of the few things that went right. But you're right. Like, McLeod, again, had a decent day. It's just, you wish you could go back in time and have him not miss a couple of those wide open throws. But he made the hard ones. Like you said, he was able to, especially when they were playing zone, he ripped apart Ottawa's zone. He struggled a bit more against man coverage, with the exception of that deep ball to Banks. But, he had some beautiful reads and throws today. He's just couldn't string enough of them together. Defensive play of the game. Where are you going for the defensive play of the game?
Again, there weren't a lot of standout moments. I think the moment that I love the most was Oakman fully embracing his CN power and picking up the Ottawa center like a small child and carrying him backwards into the quarterback for the sack. I thought that was just unbelievable, just incredible. And I wish that it had resulted in a turnover. I loved the Shane Ray sack fumble as well. I thought the D-line flashed with some really great moments. But that would be my defensive play for sure, is Oakman just manhandling the center.
It's incredible that none of those quarterback hits turned into turnovers. And that was something that was another difference in the game, where if maybe one of those turns into, because again, you're talking about a quarterback fumble, like often those turn into scoop and scores, or at least runs that put you in scoring position. And the number of times that there were blindside hits on Evans, who was unaware of the pressure coming from there. Ray had a couple. One where he actually did cause a fumble, but it bounced right back up to Evans. He was able to recover it. But yeah, if one of those ends up bouncing around for a bit, somebody scoops it up, this is a very different game. But yeah, there were way more defensive plays to choose from. Mine, I'm going to go with what was at the time seemed like a really big deal. Is back in the first quarter, Jamal Peters made a huge play. So Ottawa had the ball at Toronto's 24. It's a second down. There's a run play, I think it was to Bennett. And the backfield action that they had, the receiver motioning that they had, triggered a corner blitz from Peters. And he came at 100 miles an hour, came all the way around. It was a run play to the offensive right. He came from the offensive left side all the way around, tackled Bennett for a loss, and forced Ottawa to kick a field goal in that situation. At that time, instead of Ottawa potentially going up 10-3, it just put them up 6-3. I was thinking at that moment, like this could end up being the play of the game. Now, it turns out for me, it did end up being the defensive play of the game, only because there just weren't too many highlights after that. But yeah, that was a big play. It was a nice play from Jamal Peters, really instinctively reacting, and you got to see his speed. And man, I love corner blitzes. So yeah, that's the play of the game for me. Where are you going for your player of the game?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a little behind the scenes. I'm not a big fan of player of the game in a loss. But I think that for me, God, I want to give it to Gittins Jr. I thought he had such a great first half. But that drop just crushed it for me. I guess I would give player of the game to Macbeth. I thought he was good. I thought he had a good night. I thought he made plays and he didn't get a lot of help.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think without the drops, he's close to 70% completions. He did throw for 340 yards. There was one play he threw that could have been picked, but it wasn't, that was more of a mishandle by the receiver again, and it bounced up in the air. It probably wasn't a great idea to throw to him, but it wasn't a night with a lot of mistakes for Bethel Thompson. And anytime you end up with 340 yards passing and no interceptions, and you've got no support at all from your run game, that's a good night. So I will give it to Curly Gittins Jr., but Macbeth is my runner-up in this game. Gittins Jr. ended up with 6 catches on 8 targets, 84 yards. He also was being used as a returner today. He ended up with 3 returns for 45 yards on kickoff returns, because they were short some of the returners that they've had in recent games, with Brissett being out, Isaiah Wright not dressing. And so sort of his show, they had him and Tommy Neild was back there returning as well. So that was just, it just kind of showed how upside down everything was for today's game.
I thought, you know what? And shout out Tommy Neild. I thought he had a decent game. I thought he looked pretty good.
Yeah, he did. He's a good player. Tommy Neild, he's not going to put together huge highlight reels. That's just not the type of player he is. But he's a smart football player. He works really hard. He does everything right. He just doesn't really make mistakes. He reminds me of a Winnipeg player. I think there's, it just seems like that kind of guy that's not necessarily going to be highlight reel material, but somehow gets the job done week in, week out. And yeah, we saw Neild look good.
He feels like a guy who's going to end up with the Blue Bombers next year and average 80 yards a game. That's what he feels like.
Hopefully not for our sake. But yeah, he's a great special teams player too. So guys like that, he did some more work towards making him invaluable today, because he's a guy that you feel like the Argos just can't do without. So good for him having a really solid effort. And it wasn't something that necessarily flew off the stat sheet. He ended up with just 3 catches for 50 yards, but 50 yards is 50 yards. And he had some really nice blocks in there too, ran some good routes. He was open a bunch of times, but they were going other ways. They had other plans, other thoughts on those. So yeah, Tommy Neild definitely deserves a shout out. Well, that will just about do it for us on this post-game reaction episode of the X's and Argos podcast. Hamilton week coming up, so we will have a lot to break down as we turn our attention there. Talking to McLeod Bethel Thompson after the game, it was interesting. Someone asked him about Hamilton and what what sort of threats they pose defensively. And he answered very honestly. He's like, I haven't watched any Hamilton film to this point, which I think is correct. Like, I don't want him watching weeks in advance. That's the right thing. You just don't often hear players say that, but that is the correct response. He shouldn't have been watching Hamilton film to this point. But he said, yeah, tonight I'm going to dive into it. I'll start looking it up, see what they're doing. And the nice thing about heading into this series that we've now got, these divisional games, one after another, starting with Hamilton, is that the Argos were a little bit humbled today, and that's something that came up in the post-game press conferences today. Coach Dinwiddie suggesting that maybe the team needed that a little bit. Shane Ray echoed that sentiment as well, saying you can't really be anything but humble at this point. He's like, we haven't earned anything else. And so hopefully this loss, gets them together, and they come out the way that they came out in Halifax a few weeks ago. For JB, this is Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.
Go, Toronto Argos, go, go, go. Pull together, fight the